All right, and welcome, guys. So, with the purpose of this video, we are going to be looking at some geography features of America. These are things that you're going to need to know for this course. Where things are, the layout of the country, you need to know locations, all right? You need to know where things are and what they look like. It will definitely help with any map activities that we end up doing in class, as well as any maps that you may see on the AP exam for those of you who are taking the exam. All right, so please be sure to pay attention to this video. All right, the geography of the United States. So, some basics. It's a pretty big country, right? The US. It is the third largest country in the world, but we are half the size of Russia, we're a third the size of Africa, we're half the size of South America, and we're 2.5 times the size of Western Europe. We're a pretty decent sized country when you compare us to others, all right? Now, there are 4 regions of the United States. We have the Northeast, we have the South, we have the Midwest, and we have the West. All right, so when you are talking about different regions, so Northeast, you're looking at like Pennsylvania and New Jersey on up. Sometimes the Northeast, some people will include Delaware and Maryland sometimes, but for the most part, you can just keep them with the South. All right, and of course, there are different regions within the bigger regions. So like the Northeast, we have the Mid-Atlantic, which is New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And then we have New England, which is Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. In the South, we have the South Atlantic region, which is Maryland, Delaware, West Virginia, on down to Florida. And then we have the East South Central, and that's like Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And then we have West South Central, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. In the Midwest, we have the East North Central. That's like Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. And in West North Central, we have North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas. We have Missouri, we have Iowa, we have Minnesota. All right. And in the Western regions, now we have the Pacific region, which is, here's Alaska, which is actually up here attached to Canada. Then you have Hawaii, which is, islands way out in the middle of the Pacific. But going down the Pacific coast, we have Washington, Oregon, and California. And then we have the mountain region of the West. Montana, Idaho, we have Wyoming, we have Nevada, Utah, we have Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. Bet y'all didn't think I was going to be able to name those all off the top of my head, but I did. All right. Hopefully you guys will be able to do the same soon enough, if you're not able to already. All right. Now, getting into topography. This is the study of the shape and features of land surfaces. So this is going to be all the different land features that there are in the United States. So the topography. So this map, it shows elevations. The darker the brown, the higher the mountains are. The deeper the green, the lower the elevation is. Okay? This will also show like the vegetation, how dense it is up to more arid. So like the darker the green, it's also maybe like the more fertile the land. And the darker the browns, the mountains, the more jagged, more rocky, more desert-like if you're in the Southwest. All right, little cross section. Here are, like, if you were to cut a profile view of what the mountains and everything look like in the US, this is what it all looks like. Those mountains to the west of us go to like the Blue Ridge. They're a part of the Appalachian Mountains. We think those are pretty big, right? They are nothing compared to what we see further out west in the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada. This is from like Colorado through Nevada into parts of Southern California. Oregon and Washington have mountains like this. All right. they completely blow away any mountains that we have here on the East Coast. They're enormous. All right, the Northwest. So we have the elevations here. There are some mountains in the Northeast, but it's, yeah, for the most part, it is mountainous in some areas, but it's nothing compared to what we have out west. Now, but we do have New York City, right? Here's the Brooklyn Bridge. I plan on going there one day because it's, one of the oldest suspension bridges in the world. It's definitely the oldest one in the United States, if I recall correctly. Then we are also going to see the canals that are in New York. The Erie Canal. This was like the first canal that was built in the United States. It's basically a man-made river that was used for transporting trade goods from one area to another by boat. So they would basically connect lakes and rivers that were naturally made with these fake ones that were dug by hand. And so they would have to, unload a boat, load it onto wagons pulled by horses, and then reload onto boats. And it just made it one long trip instead of a bunch of short trips, which took more time. Now we also have Boston in the Northeast. This is basically the birthplace of the American Revolution. A lot of Enlightenment ideas would prosper and thrive here and grow into rebellion against the British. Right, Philadelphia. This is basically the city that was the birth of the country, okay? The Declaration was written here. Constitution was written here. A lot of prominent events happened in Philadelphia as well as in Boston. All right, New England with its environment, one place that is very famous for there is the leaves changing in the fall. It's one of the most beautiful sights that you'll see in the eastern seaboard of the United States is the leaves changing up in places like Vermont and Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, all of those places, Massachusetts. Now, going further south, we have the divide between the North and South, the Mason-Dixon line. All right, it is named after a man named Charles Mason and another man named Jeremiah Dixon. All right. And that is the divide right there, that red bold line. Basically, from Maryland on down is the South officially, and anything from Delaware and Pennsylvania north is the North, at least when you're talking about the East Coast. Now, the South, right? We have the bulk of the Appalachian Mountains down here in like Western Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and that goes on down into Texas, where we start seeing in Western Texas, especially some mountainous areas a little bit, but also deserts and plains. Now, Charleston, South Carolina. This is one of the first major port cities in the United States. So big trade center. Then we get New Orleans. This was a very important city, originally settled by the Spanish. It would eventually be influenced by the French, and then by the United States. All in the course of about 200 years, they would trade hands between three major powers. And it is a very unique city. If you ever get the chance to go there, I highly recommend it. It's an old but beautiful city. It's got very unique people. All right. Go a bit north to the Midwest. For the most part, pretty flat until you get to the Great Plains, where the elevation does rise, but it's flat in the Great Plains, though. This would be the area, if you're thinking of the Native American people, these would be the great horse tribes, the tribes that they were known for their skill in horseback riding and fighting from horseback. This would be tribes like the Comanche, and the Lakota and the Dakota people. That just to give a small amount of examples. There are many, many more tribes. All right, Chicago, one of the biggest cities in the Midwest. All right. The Great Plains, this is a lot of farming. A lot of the grains are grown here, like wheat and barley. They're used for making all sorts of things that we eat, all the different bready type of foods. Corn is a big staple here as well. And what you can see in this map is some of the larger tribes that were in these areas of the Great Plains. You have the Sioux, which is like the Lakota people. It's like a branch of them. The Cheyenne, Pawnee, Arapaho, the Apache. All right. And the Great Plains is basically the area between the Mississippi River that you see right here and the Rocky Mountains, which is like the biggest mountain range that there is in North America. Now, getting into the West, once you cross those Great Plains, you get all these massive mountains. And then there's desert area up here. Then you get into forested region on the Pacific coast. And you get the very temperate climate of the Southwest, at least on the coastal area, and then all the deserts down here in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah. Now, Los Angeles, some of you may know that it is basically Spanish for City of Angels. Who really knows with the way celebrities act, right? Now, Hollywood is out there. Obviously, it's a part of LA. Now, important bodies of water that you need to know. Of course, the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, the Gulf of Mexico. You also should know which Great Lake is which. All right, Lake Ontario. That is the one between Canada and New York. We have Lake Erie. Well, Lake Ontario, I will say this. I've actually been to Lake Ontario. There's amazing fishing up there for anybody who fishes. You catch fish as long as your arm. I've done it. It's awesome. The water can be as rough as the ocean, I will say that. Next, we have Lake Erie, which is right here between Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Canada. We have Lake Huron, which is actually named after the Huron Native American tribe, who was from this general area. And they are between Michigan and Canada. And then we have Lake Michigan, which is between Michigan and Wisconsin, with a little bit touching Indiana and Illinois. And then there's Lake Superior, which is between Canada and Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin. All right. Moving on. We also have the Chesapeake Bay, very important to early colonial history and the Revolutionary period in America. Jamestown is on the Chesapeake Bay. We also have the Great Salt Lake out in Utah. Salt Lake City is named after it, the capital of Utah. And yes, it is a salty lake. It's like the ocean with its salt content, maybe even a denser salt content. Right. There's Lake Okeechobee down in Florida. It's the biggest lake down in Florida. Rivers. Rivers are everywhere in the United States. Some more important than others because they are like a lifeblood system for the country. So the main ones that you would need to know are like the Hudson River up in New York, the Potomac River, which is, down here in Virginia between us and Maryland, the Mississippi River, the mother of all rivers in this country. It's the biggest, longest river that we have. It's one of the biggest rivers in the world. We have the Ohio River, which basically leads from the Mississippi into Pennsylvania and New York to the east. It's a big trade system right there using that river too. The Missouri River, that gets us up into the northwest a bit. The Arkansas River gets us right through the center. The Colorado River. And we also have the Columbia River. These are the biggest ones in the lower 48 states. There's also the Yukon River in Alaska, which I actually just found out recently, it is September 2020. I found out that my one cousin, who's a former Marine, is actually going to go on a solo canoe trip from one end of the Yukon River all the way to the other. He's basically starting in Canada, like all the way over here in Canada, going all the way up and through the Yukon River all the way to the coast of Alaska. When I find out how he does, I will let you guys know. Right? On the southern border of Texas, that is the Rio Grande River. All right. Up in the northern border here, we have the St. Lawrence River. Now, the Mississippi River. It is known as the Big Muddy. It is over 2,300 miles long, and it's draining like part of 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces. It flows into the Gulf of Mexico. It's pulling water from a massive amount of territory and flowing into the Gulf. It has effect on about 40% of the United States' like property, the land. It affects about 40% of the land's water table in some fashion. Right? One thing the Mississippi River is known for are those river boats, the big paddle boats like this. And also, some of you may know who this guy is. This is Mark Twain, a famous American author. He sailed up and down the Mississippi River in his time. He also wrote a lot about the Mississippi River and the river boats. All right. In 1993, there was a massive flood with the Mississippi River down in the St. Louis, Missouri area. It basically rerouted a large portion of the river. Okay. So you see this area right here, how it like zigzags and then goes straight. This is the flood. It flooded a lot of land. Then afterward, see how much wider it is? This little section right here turned into a much wider section, so some stuff definitely got messed up, right? Now, here's the Great Salt Lake. 2,000 square miles. That is a big lake, all right? It averages anywhere from 10 feet to 28 feet deep and is 6 times saltier than the ocean. That's pretty salty. Right. Lake Okeechobee in Florida. This is a pretty interesting looking place, right? Looks like a lot of marshlands and swampy in some areas. It is. All right, Gulf of Mexico, known for its fishing, beautiful beaches, and oil rigs. Yep, there are definitely some pretty rich oil deposits in the Gulf. We use them for drilling, and I believe Mexico does as well, at least some of them. All right. Mountains and plateaus. So other important geographical features. The Appalachian Mountains, that is what we are closest to. The Adirondack Mountains that go from New York on up through Maine. The Rocky Mountains go all the way from Canada down into Texas. The Cascade Mountains of the Pacific Northwest. The Sierra Nevada Mountains of California. The Alaskan Range Mountains, of course, in Alaska and in Canada. Mount Whitney, one of the tallest mountains on the continent, as well as Mount McKinley in Alaska. There's Pikes Peak. And now elevation. Show right here that for the most part, the United States is anywhere from like the 80 to 400, 600 meters in elevation from the sea level. Then, of course, you get to the Rocky Mountains and it just drastically shoots up. All right, we've already seen that. Now, continental divide. This is a region that basically goes along the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains, and it is like this big gap in elevation. It's like a giant valley that runs down the course of the whole country, from Montana all the way down to New Mexico. The Grand Canyon, the largest canyon system in the world, and we have it. It is in Colorado, Western Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. All right, the Great Plains. We have the Central Plains, the Atlantic Coastal Plains, We have the Gulf coastal plains. These are all flat areas, very good for farming. The Great Basin of northern Nevada. All right, but focusing on the Great Plains. This area is like the breadbasket of the country. So much farming happens here. This is the land of the buffalo. All right, plateaus. Plateaus are basically like those big flat chunks of land that just stick out above everything else. We have the Cumberland Plateau, all right, which is part of the Cumberland Gap. Everybody's heard of the Cumberland Gap, right? So that is from Kentucky down into Tennessee and part of northern Alabama. All right, part of Western Virginia, West Virginia. It is a natural passage through the Cumberland Mountains. This would be what Daniel Boone would lead settlers through in the 1700s in the first white people to go west through the Appalachian Mountains. All right. America does have its deserts as well. We have the Mojave Desert of Arizona and New Mexico, as well as Death Valley, which is on the border of Nevada and California. All right. Death Valley, they use that a lot as a backdrop for a lot of Western films, if this looks familiar to anybody. So, if we were to complete that map of everything we've looked at, this is what it would look like. All right, economic resources. All right, if you notice, a lot of manufacturing and trade is in the Northeast, but there's a lot of big farming happening basically from the Central Plains eastward. There's a lot of livestock when you go west from there, a lot of forestry activities in the Northwest. There is quite a bit of oil down in Texas and in some of the northern western areas. All right. So America is rather rich in natural resources and being able to provide economically for itself. Now, the climate, what temperatures are like in the U.S. We basically go anywhere from like humid down through subtropical. Okay? Temperate for the most part, but yeah. You guys can pretty much see what this is and understand. Now, precipitation. The darker the color, the more rain the area gets. Vegetation. All right. We, Virginia, are in the area of mixed forest down here. Now, that is, there are some grasslands, but there's a lot of heavily wooded areas. You see a lot of forests and you see a lot of grasslands in America. That is mostly what we are. All right. It's getting more into what the different regions are known for, whether it's farming, livestock, manufacturing, mixes of different items. Right. Wetlands. America does have its fair share of wetlands. These are like swampy areas. Right. Demographics. This is like percentages of different things like people and animals and areas. All right. So looking at the population density of 20 years ago in the year 2000, you can see the scale there, like what color represents what. Where would you say most of the population is? If you would say it is in areas like where New York City is, like here in like northern New Jersey and southern New York, you would be correct. You would get like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago. Yep, the big urban areas. And the further rural you get, the lesser the population is. Now, as of 10 years ago, the population of the United States was 308 million people, 700, plus change. Over the past years, like some of these figures are not quite accurate because, it's a little hard to calculate that stuff. I'm not that good at math. But essentially, there's one birth every 8 seconds in the U.S., as well as one death every 13 seconds. An international immigrant comes into the country about every 22 seconds. All right. Net gain of one person every 10 seconds. Basically, one new person is added to the population of the country every 10 seconds. Right. Racial changes. White people from 1990 to 2000. This is where the shift changes are. More people in the South and in the West, it looks like, right? For African Americans, seeing a lot of growth in the Midwest and in the South. Asians, just overall in the eastern half of the country. For Native American peoples, mostly in the South and in the West, some in the Northeast. Right, linguistics. So this would be like those accents that we hear. Okay, so like New England has a unique accent. New York has a very unique accent, right? People who are from the mountains have a vastly different accent than people who live in this area of Virginia, right? So this would be like that accent that we would associate with different areas, right? Some geographic problems that the United States has, right? Seismography, we have earthquakes. We have some here on the east, but the vast majority of them happen basically from the Rocky Mountains and westward. Alaska has its fair share of them as well, just as many as you might see in California. Right, tornadoes. We get them in Virginia, not very often, not nearly like they do in the Midwest and into the Mid-South. This area right here that I'm circling with the mouse, that is basically known as like Tornado Alley, because if there's a tornado, it's more than likely happening somewhere in the Great Plains area. Right, hurricanes. That is mostly something that happens on the East Coast. Of course, they do get stuff on the West Coast, but it's more than likely going to be in the Gulf or on the Atlantic coast of the U.S. All right, this is one of the worst ones that the U.S. has ever suffered. Hurricane Camille. It happened in 1969, Category 5. That is just like as devastating as it gets. That's like top-notch hurricane strength. Killed over 400 people. Leveled houses, destroyed entire areas. But the most expensive one was Hurricane Andrew. This one, 1992, Category 5, only killed 65 people, but it cost $30 billion with a B, dollars in damage. That is catastrophic economically. Right? Geographic diversity of America. We have a bunch of national parks. Most of them are out west, actually. Places like Yellowstone, Yosemite, two of the most beautiful parks in the world, I would argue. But national parks, all right, here we got Glacier, we have Grand Teton, we have Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. I really want to go there. And there's Everglades in Florida, if you want to see like the swamplands and gators and all that. But then we have Yellowstone, and we have the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. Very beautiful. Then there's Yosemite in California. You want to see some bears, the giant redwood trees, things like that. All right. That's going to do it for talking about the geography of the United States. All right. Come back next time, and we will be getting into the actual information of the class.